Path of Exile 2 is a fantastic RPG with a lot of issues as of right now, which obviously early access aims to correct before the game eventually comes out. Now, I've put about 80 hours into the game so far. About 10 of those hours were probably just me sitting there eating dinner with my girlfriend, waiting to come back and keep grinding this game. So probably anywhere between 60 to 70 hours is what I've actually put into this game. And I am by no means the most hardcore PoE or ARPG player out there. There are people like Rax, Vegito, DM, Quinn69. These people are way more hardcore than me. I am more of a casual ARPG enjoyer, someone that's going to go in, put a shit ton of hours into it, but not necessarily be someone that's going to have the knowledge to make the best builds in the entire game off the jump. In addition, this is my personal opinion about the game. There's going to be a lot of objectivity here that you guys might disagree with. That's okay, but this is my personal experience as a casual ARPG enjoyer, but also someone who's going to blast for a lot of hours. But before we get into it, thank you so much for over 870 subscribers. I really appreciate the support. If you are new to the channel, you like gaming news, gaming reviews with RPGs, action adventure type of games, etc., please like and subscribe if you enjoy the video you see here. Now let's get into the review. So to start off, this game has a shit ton of content in it, okay? I am not even close to where I need to be in terms of the pinnacle content. I'm around mid-endgame as of right now, and you can easily put 100 hours into this game and not be at the pinnacle content. This game has more content than a lot of ARPGs do. Maybe any ARPG other than PoE 1 has on full release, and this is still only in early access. And then on top of this as well, you're still going to have a lot of stuff coming. You're going to have more classes, more subclasses or ascendancies. You're going to have twice as much story as we have now. We have 3 acts. You're going to end up with 6 acts in the story. And then even on top of this, there's going to be a lot of new skills, both active skills, support skills, spirit skills, etc. And with the content we have available as of right now, I think a majority of it is really good. However, on the flip side, there are some pieces of this content, which I'll get to later in my review, that I just think are not necessarily downright bad, but the way that they're implemented right now require a decent amount of changes to actually be good or exceptional. So starting off with the campaign. The campaign right now has 3 acts, and then on top of this, you're going to play those 3 acts again in a harder difficulty. When the game fully comes out, you're going to have available acts 4, 5, and 6, and that harder difficulty is going to ultimately be taken away. But what I played here in the first 3 acts, as well as Cruel Difficulty, I really enjoyed. I genuinely felt like this was an exceptional campaign, especially in relation to other ARPGs right now on the market. And just like other games in this genre, the main point of the campaign, aside from the story, is to progress your character to the point where you get to the end game and have a relatively good build where you can compete and continue to progress your build within the end game. Now, PoE 2 does this a little bit differently in terms of the progression than PoE 1. In this game, you have a tab for all of your skills. Once you get skill gems, you can equip these to your character. You can also equip support gems to equip to your skill gems to buff up the different skills that you're using. On top of this, you still have the giant passive skill tree that is the biggest in any game ever, that Path of Exile honestly became known for in a lot of ways. You can actually reset this skill tree in this game as you go through the campaign for gold, which is really nice. And then on top of this, you're going to get a bunch of different gear, both normal gear, rare gear, as well as magic gear, which is the blue and yellow gear. That is going to have different modifiers on it that you're going to have to make sure that you get to make your build as best as possible as you're going through the campaign. To get these pieces of gear, you're going to kill different mobs, you're going to kill bosses, you're going to go to the different vendors and buy gear. This is really important in this game because less gear drops. However, they also are trying to make the gear that you get a little bit more impactful. And then on top of this, you also have your crafting, these different orbs that you can get where you can turn, for example, blue into yellow items, which are going to have more modifiers. You can increase the modifiers on your different pieces of items to try and make sure you're maximizing the different gear that you do get. Now, this is actually where my first issues with the game started to pop up, because at the start, you were not getting a lot of different drops in regards to crafting equipment. And as I got through the acts, I was realizing I was having a lot lower level equipment that was better than the equipment that was actually dropping for me in the later acts. So I was using pieces of gear that were level 10 all the way when I was level like 30 or 40, which kind of got a little bit of annoying, and I couldn't really craft better gear or get gear and make it better than the gear I was currently wearing because I had so little of those crafting items actually on my character or in my stash. Now, they have already changed this. You are getting a lot more in the early early game, I tested this out, and it already feels a lot better, but that was definitely an issue the first time I was running through the campaign. Now, to actually get through the campaign, you're going to be going to a lot of different areas and fighting a boss at the end of the area to kind of move on to the next area and completing different various objectives within each of these areas that you're in as you're going through the campaign as well. And the different monsters, enemy variety, specifically the bosses, I thought were incredible. The bosses specifically all have very different mechanics. There's no reskin bosses that you're fighting from previous in the campaign, and the end of act bosses, the end of the big portions of the story, are so damn good. A lot of these bosses have multiple different phases, have multiple, like I said, different mechanics that you actually have to pay attention to, or you will die. And just in general, you're gonna die a lot because this game is a lot more difficult than other ARPGs in the genre. I wouldn't say it's too hard by any means, but it's definitely challenging at points. And specifically in the campaign, I actually think this difficulty makes the game a little bit better. And I'll talk about the difficulty in some of the other game modes and in the end game a little bit later, but specifically in the campaign, I think the reason it's so fun for me, aside from obviously the normal progression that you have in ARPGs, is because it's actually challenging. You don't just have to go through and blast through everything as fast as possible, one-shot all the bosses to get to the end game. Now, granted, there are builds that can do that, and if you want to follow a build guide and do that through the campaign, you totally can. But you can also get through this campaign in relative ease, but also with some challenge there with pretty much any build that you actually try to make good. I will say though, there are some classes that struggle more than others, like in any game, but in this one specifically. A lot of melee classes have been struggling, specifically the warrior, getting through at least the early parts of the campaign. I didn't necessarily experience this a ton. I ran an SRS minion build, which is the Summon Raging Spirits, as well as my entire minion army, and it was a relatively easy experience for me going through the campaign. I obviously died a decent amount of times, but I got through it without any big issues. But aside from those outliers, I think the game as a whole and the challenge and the difficulty that the game presents you just makes you really learn the game a little bit more, really actually utilize the different features of increasing your gear or increasing your character's progression or going through the skills and making sure they're working together as best as possible, learning the different enemies, learning the different bosses and their mechanics, and overall, I think that makes the game, at least for me specifically, more enjoyable when going through the campaign. Now, while going through the campaign, you're going to unlock two things called the Trial of Sekhmet and the Trial of Chaos. And each of these trials are very, very important to your character's overall progression because they're integral in terms of actually unlocking your subclass or ascendancy and also getting more skill points to put into your specific ascendancy or subclass skill tree. So starting off with the Trial of Sekhmet, this is going to be unlocked in Act 2, and this is how you're going to actually unlock your ascendancy. And this trial is very different from the campaign because you're going to be going through different rooms that are going to have different debuffs sometimes, or increase different boons on your character, or have different challenges that you're going to have to complete. And then finally, once you complete all the floors, the final floor is a boss fight that you're going to have to beat as well. Now, the main feature of this specific trial is actually something called honor. And your honor is basically a second health bar that you can't necessarily just regenerate from using a potion, for example. You still have your normal health, and if you die, and you have to restart the entire trial over. But also, if you get hit enough times and your honor runs out, you also just completely fail this trial. Now, there are different relics that you can find that you can put on each trial that you're about to embark on, and these are going to potentially increase your maximum honor or honor resistance. They can also do other modifiers like increase your damage against bosses, reduce boss damage, reduce rare damage, etc. Now, in my opinion, on a ranged character, this was not so hard to complete. I've also completed the second one where the enemies are a lot harder and the whole challenge in general is a lot harder. But if you are a melee character, it is absolute dog shit because you're trying not to get hit by anything. And if you're melee, you have to be up in melee range to hit something, which means you're going to get hit a lot more often. Now, granted, they are already fixing some of these issues, or hopefully at least making them better by reducing close-up damage by 35% to your honor, and also fixing a bug where poisons, for example, or other debuffs were doing 3 times more honor damage than they were supposed to. But regardless, we'll have to see how this actually feels as melee, but right now, it's absolute dog shit. It's one of the most most unfun things in ARPGs that I've played, especially because it's so integral to your character's progression. Now moving on to the Trial of Chaos, and this one's relatively similar, and you have to go through all of these different trials, and each trial is going to be composed of a different challenge. In this one, you just have to not die. However, there are a lot more debuffs you're going to be getting in every room. You're pretty much going to have to pick a different affliction to go on your character or to go on the specific area that you're about to go in, and these are going to carry on through the entire thing. So unlocking 2 ascendancy points isn't bad because you only have to really clear 4 rooms, but unlocking your 8th or your 6th ascendancy points is really difficult because you actually have to get through all 10 trials and beat the final boss. Now granted, there's no honor system in here. You can get hit as many times as you want, but the amount of debuffs you're going to start racking up by the end of these trials, especially if you're going to like all 10 floors, is going to be kind of ridiculous, and it does get a little bit ridiculous, but I think this one's relatively fun. The biggest problem with the Trial of Chaos right now is the first time you go in there, it is exponentially harder than anything you're fighting in the campaign. You feel like you just need to completely change your build or completely respec everything the first time you go in there, and you might actually have to, depending on how good your build is when you get to this trial for the first time. What I did was I just continued to grind the rest of the game. I farmed some maps, I leveled up, I finished more of the campaign, and then I went back and then I completed it relatively easily on my first or second try going back. Now going into the last portion of content away from these trials and away from the campaign is the endgame. Once you beat all the first 3 acts and then you beat the same 3 acts again on cruel difficulty, which granted, it's a harder difficulty, but you're going to cruise through these pretty easily because your build's a lot better and you understand all the enemies and you know the boss mechanics, etc. But then you will get to the end game, and again, this is the reason people play ARPGs. How far can you get into the end game? How much can you progress? Can you beat the uber bosses, the pinnacle bosses, etc.? And the end game in Path of Exile 2 is composed of what they call the Atlas system. And within the Atlas, there's tons of different maps that you can run. Each of these different maps might have no modifiers, might have some modifiers, might have specific events within them to get better loot that you can continuously progress through skill trees, and the entire Atlas system as well, you can progress through its own separate skill tree. Now to activate any of these maps, you're going to have to use something called a waypoint. Now these waypoints, as far as I know, go from 1 to 15, with 15 being the hardest as of right now, and each of these different waypoints is going to also have a lot of different modifiers on it. You might increase the chance of it dropping another waypoint or a better waypoint, maybe more rare mobs, more chests, certain damage modifiers on the different enemies that you're fighting, etc. And right now, I genuinely think the waypoint system needs a lot of work, specifically because you have to use one waypoint to unlock a map, and if you die in that map, you can't run that map again until you put another waypoint in. At the beginning, before they changed it, you just couldn't run that map again at all and had to find a different way around using the different links that you have to other maps within your atlas. Now, the problem right now for me is not dying and then having to go back and restart the entire map using a separate waypoint. That's completely fine with me. If you die, you should have to restart and you should have to lose the modifiers that you might have wanted on the previous waypoint. But the problem is these waypoints are so damn rare to actually drop. And you could be running like a tier 5, tier 10 map, even tier 15 maps, and still find tier 1 waypoints. This is insane. This should never be happening. On top of this, you can have plus 300% chance to actually have a waypoint drop, and you still don't have any drop in your map. And you wasted a waypoint. Yes, you completed the map, but you haven't found any other ones to actually activate a new map or activate that same map again. Now, some other issues that I have currently with the entire Atlas system is that as you put in higher waypoints and get into higher enemy levels and higher difficulty maps, it reduces your resistance. So you could have 70 resistance for everything, and then you go into a map and all of a sudden that's knocked in half. And that just allows you to just get completely one-shot by any of the enemies in those maps because you just all of a sudden don't have higher resistance because that map specifically decreased your resistance, which, granted, they are changing this, but at the time of me playing the maps, this is an insanely necessary change because I just think that whole mechanic in general is kind of dog shit. There are not as many ways in this game to increase your resistances that there are in Path of Exile 1, for example, and then they also remove it within this. It's just annoying. But again, they're changing this, they're taking that out, so it's going to be a lot better for a lot of people that are watching this video going forward. Now, some other criticisms I have of the whole Atlas system in general: the maps right now just seem a little bit too big, and you can just run into areas that are not going to progress your map at all while you're trying to find rare mobs to actually kill to beat the map, and they're just too big. There's not enough dead ends to actually make sure you go where you're actually going, and sometimes they can feel a little bit monotonous, especially if you die after being in one for 10 minutes. Now, what I think is really cool about these maps is the different events. They brought back a lot of League mechanics in terms of events into some of these maps, like Breach, for example, or Delirium, and all of these different ones, like I mentioned, have specific skill trees, and all of these are a lot harder than the normal just generic map that you're running, and I think they're really fun. They can get you a lot of better loot, and it changes up the gameplay a decent amount for what maps you actually want to go into. On top of this, there are different towers that you can activate that are actually going to expand the amount of maps you see within the Atlas, and you can put different modifiers on these to make sure you're playing some of these different events versus some of the other ones more often, if they're the ones that you enjoy or they're the ones that you think are giving you better gear. And on top of all of this, there are a lot of things that I haven't even done within the Atlas system that I'm still progressing to, on top of even the Trial of Chaos to get my 8th Ascendancy points. I haven't done that either. I'm still progressing towards these. These are things that I genuinely think you need to put over 100 hours into the game to actually get to, but there's Uber bosses. If you kill the Uber bosses, you actually unlock a pinnacle boss in the game, and all of these, I can't even tell you how hard they are because I haven't fought them myself, but they're supposed to be the hardest content in the entire game. On top of these, there's these realm gates that I don't even know what they do. I'm sorry, I'll have to tell you guys at a later date because I have not gotten to them. There's also these vaults, relic vaults, or whatever they are. Same thing, haven't done those. There's also these hideouts in the game, which I obviously have done. These hideouts are kind of more like player housing. They bring them over from PoE 1, where you can have just everything within your little hideout, which I think is really cool. So there's definitely more content, even me, after playing 60, 70 hours, for me to still complete, just within the early access. Again, there's going to be a ton more content when this game actually comes out. Also, one last point really quickly about the Atlas system in the map. Please add more bosses. I just want to fight more bosses. Now, overall, though, I've had an incredible time with this game, even despite some of my feedback. I think it's by far one of the best ARPGs in the entire genre, and given some player feedback and them continuously fixing the game like they already have been, this could easily be the best ARPG, in my opinion at least, of all time. It's already my second favorite game of the year, and it's in early access. So this game is absolutely amazing. You should play it in early access. It has more content than almost any other game in the ARPG genre right now that is actually released in full, as well as most other games that you can play on the market in general. And obviously, it's still early access, so this is the time to provide feedback as well. If you guys don't agree with me on what I liked or disliked or what I think needs changed, that is okay. Grinding Gear Games isn't going to just look at Straw Hat Mikey 23's channel with less than 900 subscribers and say, we're going to make those changes, okay? Provide your own feedback, give your own criticism of the game and what you liked about the game, and Grinding Gear Games will do what they have always done and make good decisions for the overall player base based on what they think they need and based on what they think they want. That is the sole job of a good developer. Thank you guys for watching the video. I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe if you did enjoy what you see here, and comment down below what you think about Path of Exile 2. Do you think it's a good game? Do you think it's a bad game? What do you think could be improved? What do you like about it so far? I would love to hear everything down below in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace!